Chat night, we bring you good vibe, we shine on the light. We all over the world, Chat night Africa, Chat night Africa. We all over the world, Chat night Africa, Chat night Africa. Welcome to Chat night, the only place that we give you good vibe. Chat night Africa.
Chat night Africa. Let's gang up, change mindsets, and empower Africans. Are you ready? Africa to the world.
And now, live from the headquarters of Chat Night Africa, Divine Champion.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Chat Night Africa, Voices of Africa at Chat Night. My name is Divine Champion, and I am anchoring this broadcast from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Wars are terrible. Regardless of the reasons, intrastate and armed conflict is worse. Women are raped, children forced into fighting, schools grind to a halt, and those who differ are called traitors, kidnapped, and killed. People settle scores, and oftentimes you can hardly tell who the enemy is. Since 2016, this has been the scenario in Anglophone Cameroon. Some prefer to call the geography Southern Cameroons. What began as a peaceful strike by lawyers and teachers very quickly spiraled into an armed uprising against the central government in Yaoundé. All wars end in some form of dialogue, so why not now? The more people get killed, the more property is destroyed, the louder the question whether the war is even worth it. One would think that Anglophone Cameroonians who complained all along of marginalization would be unified in support of the war. Far from it. Facts. One group still believes in the unitary state. Another group thinks a federal structure is the way out. And the third group says outright separation or nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, my questions today will reflect three positions, all the three currents on the war. The phone lines will be open for questions from the public. Ladies and gentlemen, join me now in welcoming our guest, first live from South Africa, Dr. Gabila Fortune. Dr. Gabila Fortune, thank you for coming on Voices of Africa live from South Africa, Mandela's country.
Thank you, Badi. Good afternoon and good evening to all your listeners and those who are watching us. It's a pleasure to be on this platform as always, and I look forward to our engagements.
And now we introduce to you Pastor Kennedy Ejacha. Please welcome him on the platform. Pastor Ejacha, thank you for accepting our invitation to come on Voices of Africa.
It's a pleasure, Nidi. Once more, I am on this platform, a platform that is lending its voice to the voices of Africans so we can express ourselves as we forge a way for a better Africa.
Thank you, Pastor Ejacha. And now I will introduce the next guest. That is Lawyer Are Obenson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Lawyer Are Obenson. Hello, Lawyer Obenson. Thank you for coming on Voices of Africa. We'll have a good conversation today.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as soon as we have the other guest who is going to be joining us shortly, we will introduce him on the platform. Again, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, all wars end in some form of dialogue. The phone line will be open. You are free to challenge the positions of the panelists, and you're also free to add your ideas as to how the conflict in Anglophone Cameroon, some people prefer to call it Southern Cameroons, can be resolved. The first question is going to Dr. Gabila Fortung, live from South Africa. Dr. Gabila Fortung, Anglophone Cameroonians, some people prefer to call themselves Southern Cameroonians, have complained for 60 years, if I'm not mistaken, about marginalization by successive Francophone governments in Yaoundé, Cameroon. How do you explain that there are all these factions that set out first to fight the government of Yaoundé, Paul Biya? Now they are fighting each other, killing each other, and even kidnapping and killing the same people they are expected to protect. How do you explain that?
Baji, thanks for that question. I think there's a number of factors that could possibly explain that. I think one is it's in human nature to have a divergence of opinion and views and approaches when it comes to the resolution of any conflict. I mean, even in the family, you may be sitting with your wife and you just want to go and place a simple order from KFC, and you could find yourself wanting to all solve a common problem of hunger, but having a lengthy conversation about what you want to get out of the menu. So there will be divergences of approach that is a function of the lenses through which people look to appreciate the problem. That can be expected. It's normal. If you look at it within the context of conflicts of this nature around the world, I take the case in point, South Africa, where we are. There was unanimity around the condemnation of the apartheid regime, for example. But that notwithstanding, there were a divergence of a great variety of different groups and groupings in factions that arose to fight this perceived common enemy from different ideological perspectives. So that is not surprising. It's quite normal in situations of this nature. Its persistence is what becomes an anomaly, because after you have exchanged ideas and have interpreted the circumstance from different perspectives, before long you need to start finding common ground to be able to see that you find increasing agreement around the things over which you find common grounds to be able to define the solutions to the problem that you have all identified. So, and I think that we are there. I think that 4 or 5 years, getting soon to 6 years down the line, we've about exhausted all our own capital of disagreement and infighting. It's about time we begin to find common grounds and find common positions to solve the problem that we all agree does exist.
Dr. Gabila Fortung, live from South Africa. The next question is going to Pastor Kennedy Ejacha. Pastor Kennedy Ejacha, I painted a scenario of war, intrastate conflict, which is devastating. We've seen people beheaded in southern Cameroons. Schools are not going. In other words, a lot of the children, young people have carried arms and they're fighting in the bush. There are reports of rape, people kidnapped. Those who are called blacklegs or traitors get slaughtered like goats. Reverend Pastor Kennedy Ejacha, would you say the war is worth it? Didn't Anglophone Cameroonians have a right to fight back if their complaints fell on deaf ears?
Yes, Didi, right from the get-go, I'm going to say the war isn't worth it, but the struggle is worth it. We have to make a difference between the struggle and the war. And now, it's important that we start by identifying the reason why there is a war. Because if we get to understand why there is a war, we would be able to pinpoint the instigator of the war. And once you are able to identify the instigator of the war, then you would easily know where the stakes are. Now, in your intro, you said something that was very capital. All this started by a peaceful protest of teachers and lawyers. That's where we should always start when we want to talk about this war. It was a peaceful protest that is protected by the Constitution of Cameroon. Whether we say Cameroon is a totalitarian regime or not, the reality is that the preamble of the Constitution of Cameroon guarantees citizens' right to protest. So now we had peaceful protests by teachers and lawyers for legitimate political reasons. What was the response of the powers that be? Instead of engaging the protesters, the powers that be came on with a heavy-handed response, and that's where the killing started. So we had peaceful protesters claiming their rights. That's legitimate because the method that they were using, it's a method that is legitimized by the Constitution. The first victims were civilians. And when we see what happened from the onset, scores of young Southern Cameroonians, it means Cameroonians from the Northwest and Southwest regions, were taken out from their normal habitat to different places in the country where nobody could account for where they are. It was a free-for-all fight. And then the first reaction of some of those that started to respond back to the government violence was, there's just one way out. We have to protect ourselves. Just see, they started with den guns. Now, those of us who have been involved in this political environment in Cameroon for myself for about 27 years, we have always preached nonviolence. That's why I said that the war is not worth it, because there are better means of pursuing the struggle without exposing as many people as we have exposed today by going to war. So at the end of the day, there is a legitimate struggle. There is a reason for people to fight, but they don't always have to fight by using weapons. It doesn't have to be war.
There'll be a follow-up to the questions or the statements you've just made, Reverend Pastor Kennedy Ejaja. You are watching Voices of Africa on the platform Chat Night Africa. Our broadcast is live on our website, www.chatnightafrica.net. I'm your broadcast anchor in Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, Divine Nchamakong. At this point, viewers, we will bring on lawyer Are Obenson. Lawyer Obenson, there are people who say, you know what, no matter what, Cameroon has got to be, in their words, one and indivisible. And even with this philosophy, they think that certain things ought to be addressed. Are you of that school of thought, sir?
Well, I'm of the school of thought that we should see every Cameroonian as equal. And whilst many people would focus on the form of state, I think that that's putting the cart before the horse. We really need to, I think our way out of the crisis in which we are in is defining who we really want to be as a country. what are the values that best represent the Cameroonian? And it is those values that should inform how we intend to design a country that protects those values. Because I think focusing a lot on just the form of state actually ignores even the reason why there is a struggle, right? Because there is a struggle because of certain fundamental values that needed to be preserved in the context of the state in which our forefathers wanted to create. What are those values and how can we ensure that they're protected? And I think we need to start from there. If we can ensure that every Cameroonian has the dignity, the human dignity that is deserving of every human being, that every Cameroonian has access to equal opportunities, then the question of how do we preserve that, how do we protect that, becomes secondary to this core value. So I'm of the opinion that let's not fight too much about what the form of state would be. Let's begin by saying, what is the ideal that we want to uphold in the Cameroon that we want?
Before I bring on Mr. Muchia, who will share his initial points of view on the conflict in Southern Cameroons or Anglophone Cameroons, however you want to call that geography, when you say that the form of state should not be what we should be fighting for, or the debate should be about, but the form of state is at the origin of why people are fighting. How do you ignore that?
Yeah, because I think that that's the process. That's not the outcome. You could have tyranny in every form of state. I think that as a people, as a country, every country has a philosophy or an ideal on which it is created. And defining what that ideal, I think, is what has been lost in the conversation. It's really important for me to state this, that I do absolutely respect every opinion that's on the table, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this.
You don't agree with every opinion on the table, do you?
I accept every opinion on the table. People legitimately have a right to ask for independence. That's a legitimate right. People have a right to ask for federation, and people have a right as well to say that they prefer unitary state. At the end of the day, unless we listen to all these varying opinions, can we arrive at an opinion that will work the best for most of us? So that's how I look at it.
And that is lawyer Ariel Obenson. I will bring the other guest to just join us, Mr. Ato Muchia. Ladies and gentlemen, join me now in welcoming Mr. Ato Muchia on the platform. Thank you, Mr. Muchia, for accepting to come on Voices of Africa.
Thank you, Divine, for having me on the show. My warmest regards to you and all the panelists. I do apologize for the technical hitch I had on my end, but thank you for having me.
And we thank God that the glitches from your end are over. My question to you, sir, this thing morphed quickly into an armed conflict, an armed uprising against the government in Yaoundé. Would you say, and given all the things that have gone on, even between the armed groups, would you say the war is worth it?
I don't know that war is ever worth it. In war, there are no winners and no losers. War is a last resort, having explored all other avenues. And as Kennedy said, President Kennedy, not Pastor Kennedy, no point intended here, but as President Kennedy said, those who obstruct peaceful revolution make violent revolution inevitable. At some point, the human character is going to express itself. The desire is going to express itself. And when you push people to the war, more so in a violent way, at some point they are going to react. I was off technically, but I was following you on my other gadget. And I think it was Pastor Kennedy who said this event started with the lawyers and the teachers. I don't think so. I think the lawyers and the teachers were the boiling point of this struggle. This struggle has been in place since 1961. If you go back and read the history, we've had complaints from our founding fathers, from late Jua, with all due respect, PM Jua, the Honorable Jua, from late Professor Fonlong, from late John Gufoncha when he resigned, if you read his letter. So this has been going on from the late Albert Mukong, from Fongoji Dinka. This has been kept under pressure. It's been a pressure cooker. And at some point, the steam is going to explode. It's like a volcano. And so you have war. It is what it is. War is very bad. War is damaging. War is scarring. War is traumatizing. But it is a last resort when it comes to a question of life and death. And that's where we find ourselves, a question of life and death. Nobody here can guarantee me the life of the next Southern Cameroonian tomorrow. I'm talking about in the next 10 hours. None of us can guarantee it. So it is what it is.
Mr. Muchia, have you seen human rights reports? I mean, reports from different human rights organizations. And do you believe in their reports or their reporting on the war going on?
I give them the benefit of the inaccessibility and verification of facts. But just like in Syria, we had international organizations reporting what was happening in Syria from reports that came from those who managed to slip out of the border, out of Syria, those who were running out of Aleppo. Were they verifiable? We don't know. But that's what they had. It's just like North Korea. So some of these people are doing their best to report based on the available information. We've been calling for a fact-finding mission, right? To get to the bottom of this, to get to the facts. The regime is stonewalling it. So I give them credit. I speak to people on the ground. I trust what they tell me. And some of it corroborates what some of the media houses are reporting. But some of those reports are just, way off left field.
You speak to people on the ground, and I'm happy you do. That way we can have some first-hand information. When you speak to people on the ground, what are you hearing?
It's dire.
As far as human rights violations are concerned.
As far as human rights violations specifically, it's gruesome. It's despicable. It's mind-boggling that the international community is silent. A lot of the crimes being perpetrated have been prosecuted. There is nothing that the Biya regime has done, or there is nothing al-Bashir, for example, of Sudan did that the Biya regime has not done. There is nothing that Charles Taylor did that the Biya regime has not done. Their soldiers, on their orders, have killed pregnant women. They've shot babies at point blank range. They've burnt people in their homes. People have disappeared mysteriously. There are thousands in prison. So why would you prosecute a Charles Taylor? Why would you prosecute or put out a warrant for an al-Bashir and not for the ruling members of the Biya regime and clan? So it's comparable if you want to have a picture.
How do you respond, Mr. Muchia? How do you respond to people who also draw parallels with what the Ambazonia fighters are doing and what General Butt-Naked in Liberia was doing? How do you respond to that?
We are not excusing what some of the liberation fighters are doing, right? They must be held accountable. And we have said, let the fact-finding mission, let the UN go in there. Any of the liberation fighters who are found guilty should answer to what they've done. We've called them, we've cautioned them, we've advised them that what they are doing crosses the line of Geneva Convention and punishable under the Rome statutes. That is clear. I'm not saying they are angels. They have committed their offenses. But let everybody be held responsible for what they did.
Before I bring on the other guests on the platform, and you are free to debate each other, when you speak to the people who are fighting on the ground, who carry guns, and you tell them about Geneva Convention, the rule of war crimes, what's their response? And do they still continue to do it? If yes, how do they justify that?
Well, some of them have changed their ways. It's a work in progress. It's not concluded. A lot of these groups are independent, right? In some villages, as a lot of them do not know each other. Somebody who is fighting in Dongam Mantum or in Menchum rarely knows what is going on in Meme or in Fako or in Kupe, right? So these are different groups in different villages. And because there is no central command, it's hard to disseminate or these lessons and instructions and what we try to get them together so that we don't have to spread out to every nook and every cranny. Some are just bandits who claim to be fighters, but were criminals even before the whole struggle started, who now are armed, and a lot of people are committing a lot of mischief under the banner of fighting for the liberation, back at home, back in the diaspora, where have you. But then it's blanketed as amber fighters. Some of them are just criminals, but we do our best, to instruct those we can.
Thank you, Mr. Ato Muchia. And since we're talking about the possibility of war crimes in this conflict, we will at this point bring on lawyer Are Obenson to take some questions in that regard. Lawyer Obenson, have you read reports by human rights organizations about what's going on in southern Cameroon or in Anglophone Cameroon?
Yeah, we've all seen the reports that have come out of the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Yes, I've read some of them.
And are these credible organizations in your point of view?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that these organizations are credible. As Mr. Muchia said, sometimes it's challenging to actually get factual information. They have methods and methodologies that they use to corroborate some of this information. But yes, there's...
I would say that while it's difficult to corroborate some of these things, we have also seen social media flooded with videos of government soldiers burning down, tormenting, dragging female children on cement pavement, beating people mercilessly. We have also seen fighters of Ambazonia, instructing school children to pull off their dresses and walk naked, beating women who say, whom they accuse of violating the Monday ghost towns and beating them, asking them to. So we've seen all these videos. So there's not a doubt that both sides are committing atrocities. Here's the difference. One side is a non-state actor, or one side constitutes non-state actors, and the other state or the other side of the conflict or the fight, you're talking about a constituted army.
Yeah.
When you see the excesses of the military of Cameroon in the Anglophone areas, do you have the impression that somebody is even in command of those soldiers?
It is completely unfortunate and unacceptable. And to your point, and to the point that was raised by the Reverend about the origins of the armed conflict in itself, I think we know that it's the high-handedness of the government response that continues or that triggered the movement into an armed conflict. And for many of us, we had predicted this, that it would eventually get down to this, because when you start an armed conflict like this, the more people stay out of the ordinary course of their businesses. People have to find ways to survive. On the one hand, that's for the people that are being affected. But on the other hand, for me, it's unsustainable that 5 years into the war, the government of Cameroon hasn't realized that an armed oppression of the people is not necessarily the way out of this conflict. You know, in coming here, one of the things that I'm really encouraging Cameroonians, and I was glad that you invited me here, was really to figure out a way that we get out of this. For us civilians, we're not in control of what government does, but we're in control of the arguments that we can make and where we make those arguments and how we can convince forces around the world to join us in helping the government of Cameroon understand that you cannot kill every Anglophone to be able to dominate the Anglophone territories of Cameroon.
Lawyer Obenson, you keep making references to Cameroonians. Some people say they are not. They say they are Southern Cameroonians. They even push further to say they are Ambazonians. Why are these people wrong?
I will not speak for those people. People have a right to call what they want to call themselves. I know of a country called Cameroon that I come from, and it's in the context of that I'm speaking. Maybe someday that country is not going to exist, and we would call it what it is. For now, many of us have carried Cameroonian passports. We're born in a country called Cameroon. Eventually, if that changes, that's okay. But people have a right to call themselves what they want to call themselves. And so I would not speak for them. I'll speak for myself, that I'm a Cameroonian. I understand that this country, Cameroon, is going through a civil strife, and we, Cameroonians, have to find a way out of it. Whatever that outcome is, I'm hoping that that outcome ensures the dignity of every child that is born in Cameroon, that we create opportunities for people to achieve their greatest potential. That's what this conflict is all about. At the end of the day, it is not just about a structure or agreement or even history. All of those are components of it. But if the outcome is that we just have a country, that to me, it's not the outcome. It doesn't address the root cause itself. It is rooted in us seeing other people as secondary, seeing other people as second class, or seeing other people as unequal to us. We have to educate ourselves differently. And if there's a fight that we have to fight, it's in our minds that we begin to see each other as equal.
In my introduction, said there are three currents on this conflict. Those who believe that even talking about federalism or unitary state is a non-starter. These are the people who have carried up arms against the central government in Yaoundé. There are people like Pastor Ojacha who believe in federalism. There are other people who believe in the unitary state of government. How do you begin to resolve this problem with these factions, with all the schools of thought, without addressing the question of geography, without talking about structure?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is listen to each other. And that's really important, and that has been missing in this conversation. There was an attempt of a national dialogue, which I think was a complete failure and a complete wasted opportunity for us. Whether people are willing to secede or not doesn't mean that we shouldn't sit down. The only way that we can find peace is if we have the ability to listen to people who differ in opinion. Because whether we're one country, 6 countries, 2 countries, there will still be people who differ in opinion. And if we do not have the maturity to accept this difference in opinion and yet have a common purpose, that our common purpose is to plot a way forward where everybody can attain their greatest potential, where everybody can be considered equal, and a country that is inclusive enough to accept people that are different in opinion and language, is really what the outcome of this conversation has to be. Unless we get to that point where we're listening to these differences in opinion, accommodating one another, we can find our way out of this conflict.
Well, you're a lawyer. Sometimes people resolve conflicts in courts of law. At some point, I'm going to ask you if this is something that should be taken to an international court of law. We'll come to that. At this point, I'm going to invite Pastor Ojacha. Pastor Ojacha participated at the Grand National Dialogue in Yaoundé, and we'll be asking him whether, and The government of Cameroon says that's one way of resolving the problem. Pastor Ejacha, when you flew to Yaoundé, what were you thinking?
Yes, well, I don't think it's the government of Cameroon that's saying that having a national dialogue is one way of resolving the problem. The government of Cameroon has never believed in dialogue. So when we went in for the dialogue, we went in all honesty. We went in knowing that we are going to meet our compatriots who share different opinions from us, and then we were going to dialogue. So actually there was a dialogue. We dialogued, and that's not the first time that Cameroonians are on the dialogue table, because we shouldn't be making the mistake of always thinking that the problem is that we don't listen to each other. No, the problem is that we don't want to respect each other's opinion. And when we talk about respecting each other's opinion, we have to understand that in a democracy that we are supposed to be, there is something that they call the majority opinion. And there are mechanisms in place to fish out what the majority thinks. And that's where the problem starts with Cameroon. Because the systems that are supposed to identify popular opinion have been hijacked by a minority. So when we went in, we dialogued. We came out with suggestions. Just as there was a dialogue during the tripartite in the 1990s. Just as there was a constitutional amendment. Now, I differ with some who think that the problem is there's a radical branch of Cameroonians who are bent on nomenclature, like we need a federation and we want a federation. No. If you look in the brief history of Cameroon, those who are even clamoring for federation, it's because they have come to the conclusion that self-determination is the only means by which we can respect the dignity of people. Self-determination. And then in perils in the different systems of governance that exist, it just so happened that there is a system of governance that is called a federation. And that federation has so many shades. That is why we had a 1996 constitution that came and sort of boiled down for a while the ardor of those who were fighting for self-determination. Because in the 1996 constitution, there was a net advancement towards self-determination. So now, when you look at the evolution of the political landscape in Cameroon, there is a consistency that cannot escape the mind of those who are very critical. It is that the only radicals that we have in Cameroon is the BR regime, is a system in place. Those are the only radicals. Because at each time that we've had those opposing, those radicals in Cameroon, those from the opposite side have always moved towards accommodating. The 1996 constitution was an accommodation accepted by Federalists. When we went for the major national dialogue, it was also a moment of good faith from those who call themselves Federalists, because we said, okay, if nomenclature is a problem, let's go on something. And they said they were going to touch on a special status.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you a question about special status. It looks like somebody's on the line. Hello, this is Voices of Africa at Chat Night.
Hello.
Yes, everybody's listening to you across the planet.
Thank you. This is for Richard. I'm calling from Florida, United States. It's a very interesting.
First of all, is Pastor Ejacha hearing your question? Do you hear Mr. Ndifo?
Yes, I'm hearing.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Ndifo Richard.
Thank you. Quite an interesting conversation going on. Just want by remarking to say that we all agree that there is a pertinent issue. There's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. This is to all of us. We need to plumb to this level of depravity of society's work in order to solve this problem. This is a general question I just want us to reflect over. I will address one question directly to Mr. Motia. Mr. Motia, can you please tell us what clear path do we have to independence? Do we have a clear path to independence? And if we have that, what
Mr.
is it?
Motia, did you get the question?
Yes.
All right. What's the clear path to independence?
Right. Then,
take note of the question, Mr. Motia.
Yes.
Still to Mr. Motia, I want to find out from Mr. Motia, how do you differentiate between the Amber Boys and the bandits that you refer to? What method do you use to draw that line between these two groups of people? And finally, I will ask the last question to Mr. Obenson. I want to know from Mr. Obenson, you made some very interesting remarks, and I just want to find out from you, if you think that the current regime is approaching or addressing the crisis the way a government should, and if not, what do you think the government needs to do to actually solve this problem?
Okay, Mr. Obenson will be coming on the stage to answer. He is getting your questions. Thank you, Mr. Ndifo Richard, calling from Florida.
Thank you so much.
Now, Mr. Motia, the first question, I'm sure you got it.
Yes, I did.
What's the clear path to independence?
There are two paths to independence, and there are two protagonists or two actors on the stage. There is La République du Cameroun, and there is Southern Cameroons, formerly the British Southern Cameroons. They have to agree, unfortunately, to that path. The first path is one of civility, as we saw the UK allow the people of Scotland make that determination without spilling any blood if they wanted to stay in the Union or if they wanted to break away. Both actors have to agree. If La République is civil enough and wants to behave the way that we saw the UK behave, the way that civilized people and governments behave in the 21st century, there will be a peaceful path, because I can guarantee you, forget any scientific survey, random survey, any means, a majority of Southern Cameroonians, if we were to vote today, will vote for independence. I can guarantee you that. That is the first path, that La République becomes civil and sensible enough to allow the people decide, as our guests, as fellow panelists have been saying, self-determination. What do the people want for themselves? That's the first path, which is, unfortunately, in my estimation, the unlikely path. The next path, like President Kennedy said, will be to fight for it, because nobody will give you independence if they are not willing to be civil. Then you have to fight for it. There is no other path. There is no middle ground, unless, and that fighting may lead the international community to step in, as they did in Sudan, as they did in Eritrea, step in and force that divorce. What we forget, which Americans have used and have said, the 1961 plebiscite was an experiment. America has called it democracy after 200 years. Obama used that word, the American experiment. It has not worked for 60 years. How many more years do we want this experiment before we come to the realization that it did not work? So I hope I answered the first question. We have
okay, and the second question, how do you distinguish between Amber Boys or the Ambazola fighters and bandits?
It's very hard. the only way we know are the people we speak to and the people we can support and we recognize as fighters. It's war. It's chaos. Like the former Minister of Justice of Liberia told us, during war, all the institutions break down. So it's hard to go into a war and try to identify who are thieves, who are not. In a civil society, yes, you have the police, you have intelligence, you have secret service. Yes, they can go around and round up criminals. During war, it's hard. So we know those when the fighters, if somebody commits an offense and the fighters are able to identify, then they say, oh, this person who did this kidnapping doesn't belong to, any of the fighting groups, or this person who did this, yes, belongs to this group, and then we try to go after that group or the leaders of that group. Unfortunately, we've seen some groups use kidnapping as policy. So are those people listening to those groups? Are they fighters? Are they criminals? It's open, but it's hard during war. It's hard. It's hard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arthur Muchia. Now, Pastor Ejacha, you were talking about the Grand National Dialogue, which you participated. You say that you rubbished it, basically. Okay, but government is saying that that's an attempt to solve a problem.
No, the outcome of it is a sham. And this is where I'll join Barrister Obenson. It's all about outcome. If you organize a sham and then you have an expected outcome, people will celebrate the outcome. So no matter how good it is, whatever you organize, and then you don't get to the expected outcome, there is a problem. So we went in for the national dialogue as convened by the government to pacify Cameroon, to create a clear and credible path towards ending the war. Now, let's take 2019 and today. You would see that the situation has worsened, and it hasn't worsened because of the lack of the will of people from the other side of the aisle. I mean, those who are not in the government. But it's because of the government's intransigency towards accepting that there is a systemic problem that needs to be solved by, and let's take it this way, revolutionizing what we have in place, which is not working. And what is the outcome that we are all expecting? Again, it is self-determination. The government came and talked about a special status, brought us back to, I think, Article 64, because the special status thing was not an invention of the major national dialogue. It's something that has been in the Constitution. So, but now, at the level of making it effective, what are we seeing? Recently, and I take this example, there's, I think it should be about 3 or 4 months ago, the government of Cameroon bought vehicles, 10 vehicles, for the regional presidents, invited all the regional presidents to come to Yaoundé to take the keys of their vehicle. Now, get this. The regional presidents of the Northwest and the Southwest were in Yaoundé with all the other regional presidents. And my first question was then, what is special about the Northwest and Southwest that is not able to distinguish them from the other 8? Since the goal of a special status was, we want to respect your cultural heritage, give you institutions that will demarcate you from those who want the Jacobin central system.
We will come to the special status for you to point out just what is wrong, some of the things that are wrong with the special status, because if you ask Mr. Paul Biya and his ministers in Yaoundé, or those who believe in the unionism, that's the one and indivisible state of Cameroon, they'll tell you that, well, some specificities of the Anglophone regions were addressed. We'll come to that. But time for me to ask Dr. Gabila Fortune on the screen some questions. Dr. Gabila Fortune, there are people who believe that federalism or unionism is a non-starter. What's the path to independence?
Thanks so much, Badi, for that question. Let me re-echo what I think Comrade Mucha has said in response to that question. I think he answered it quite succinctly. There are two possible paths to independence. It can be a path to independence that says, let us have a civil conversation, let us recognize the diversity that assembles both cultures. Let's agree that they cannot live together under one umbrella and agree to go our separate ways peacefully. Or it can be by war. So those are the two paths. And in the context of the knowing that the leopard that we are dealing with and the sports that he has demonstrated, it would be extremely an act of divine intervention to us to think that there would be civility on the path of the government of Cameroon, which sort of, although I do theoretically there are two paths that Mr. Mucha has defined, in the practical context of what we are confronted with, we are technically reduced to one path. If the Southern Cameroons is going to get independence from La République du Cameroon, it will have to be by war. I don't see the other path being a possibility at this stage, taking into account who we are dealing with.
Even though you don't see it, do you believe that federalism could be a way out?
I would join Dr. Array and the others on this panel to say that I feel that the issues that we are dealing with are much more beyond the questions of the form of the state. The form of the state is a very cosmetic conversation. Yes, up front, there are certain form of states that are better suited to manage diversity. Within the context of the realities of where Cameroon is, yes, I believe that a return to a two-state federation seems to be something that presents for us very many global examples of the management of diversity. I'm thinking of the Swiss Federation. I'm thinking about the management or the configuration of the devolution of power within the United Kingdom. I'm thinking about, there are very many practical examples that for all intents and purpose represent a possibility of the management of diversity within the context of a broader Cameroon, and which I think this is what the question is. There's no doubt within the segment of the Anglophone, the Southern Cameroonian population, that there is a desire for complete autonomy in the management of our affairs, by virtue of the fact that we are, one, convinced that we would better manage if granted an opportunity. Secondly, because we firmly convinced that historically, legally, constitutionally, we are entitled to it by virtue of our understanding of the decolonization processes of trusteeship territories. So it's an entitlement. So from that perspective, and I understand that it's from that perspective, a whole lot of people think that there's nothing to have, there's no conversation to have about this. But coming back to an articulation of the importance of us considering a two-state confederation is built out of an understanding of the conspiracy of the international community against us. So when you look at the facts, you look at the history, you look at the constitutional evolution, you look at the merits of the argument that we are putting on the table, there is no argument. It's no dispute. It's beyond dispute that the Southern Cameroonians, like former UN trusteship territory, is completely entitled to independence, and yes, could have been and should be and would be economically sustainable and viable. But when you go back to interpret the conspiracy or the gang of the international community against that territory that started all the way in 1961, you need to think again.
Okay, please hold your thought there. We have Mr. Difo Richard back on the line. Hello, Richard.
Yes, hello.
You just sent me a text that there's something you fundamentally disagree with. What is it?
Yes, the question I asked about the path to independence, I don't seem to be satisfied with the answers that I'm getting. When you say path to independence is war, how do you get, when you fight the war, how do you get independence? That's the question. When after fighting, how do you get independence? Because it has to be a process that has to get through several steps, and then you achieve independence. You cannot just get up and fight a war and then suddenly you achieve independence. So when you say that the path to independence is by war, it doesn't make sense to me. I want to hear you give me logically the different steps that you intend to take to arrive at independence. That's my question.
Now, before they get to answer, my guest on the platform, Dr. Fortung, gets to answer, and Mr. Muchia. Richard, I mean, the cases of South Sudan, Eritrea have been frequently cited. How is that not a logical explanation to war as a path to independence? Didn't they fight a war to get their independence? And why do you think Southern Cameroonians' war for independence is wasted energy?
Well, I didn't say that it's a wasted energy. I was trying to understand, because up to this point, I don't think to understand how, by just fighting. Well, you cited the case of Sudan. It's interesting because Sudan and Cameroon are two different countries and two different circumstances. If you look at the steps that were taken in Sudan to eventually gain independence, it's completely different. That is one aspect. Another aspect is that the international community, at this point, when you look at what happened after Sudan was granted South Sudan was granted independence, the international community seems to even regret that decision, because they look at it as if it was a wrong decision they took, because it led that nation into chaos, and they will not want to see another nation go down that path. So that is why I really want to understand from your guests how they intend, how the people who are propagating for independence, how they intend to, what steps concretely, in concrete terms, what steps do you need to you want to take to arrive to that point where eventually we'll have independence? Because we are talking about independence. We are not just talking about fighting war. We can fight this war over and over and over and end up not having it. So that is not a path.
Okay, your point.
Logically, how we get to that point.
Okay, your point has been taken. Before the guests respond to you, here is what Sheikh Tata Ate says. War can never grant independence. Dr. Gabila, he's actually addressing you, that war can never grant independence. Maybe you have a comment to say about that. Christine Asene Lambu says, what peace cannot give you, war cannot give you. Now, my two guests on the screen, and then I'll bring in lawyer Obenson to respond. There are people who say, hey, look, listen, how viable is war as a means of achieving independence? I mean, and I'm going to ask you even a question of independence, what it really means, because I've had people asking me that question. Your response, first of all, Dr. Gabila Fortune.
Okay, short. I'll try to make my answers very brief. And I also try to make my answers very, very hypothetical.
Okay.
Hypothetical from the perspective of I'm not an advocate for independence by war. But suppose I'm a professor in a lecture theater and I was posed that question from a political science and international relations perspective. I would say hypothetically, suppose that we have the backing of a G5 country. Let's say we get Russia, give us all the arms that we need. The pathway in 3 steps to independence is to conquer the territory, secure it, and then pursue recognition in the international community. To conquer the territory and secure it, you need military might. So you essentially have 2 ways. You need to then beat La République back to the borders beyond the Mongol, and then be able to secure that territory militarily, exercise some kind of administrative control over it, and then diplomatically engage the international community through the international systems, as was in the case in South Sudan, to then go through the process of recognition. Now, that is the textbook explanation of independence by war. And when we talk about independence, to come back to your question, it would entail admission to the United Nations as a member state of the UN, and it would entail admission to the AU as a member state of as probably the 55th or the 56th country of the African Union. We are essentially rewinding back time and going back to correct what never happened in 1961 and making sure that the territory of Southern Cameroon become a country, a member state with its own flag, its own anthem, with a president that receives 21 gun salute and has a seat at the table of the international community. That is the independence we are talking about. Now, that is the hypothetics. So that's to answer Dr. Sheikh Tata. That is the independence by war, which, in the perspective of a whole lot of people, it is the justifiable path to security of independence because it has a legal basis. It's correcting history. It's a one-way street to resolving our frustrations with this association with La République du Cameroun, and it's sort of it's a quick fix solution. Now, to move away from that, let me now ask a question that has not been asked. Let me answer a question that has not been asked. Within the context of what we are dealing with, is that feasible? Is that possible? Or should I say, should we be going down that route? And I'm one person that have come to the realization that I tell myself, I would rather have the Southern Cameroonians alive to enjoy a greater degree of autonomy in a prosperous Southern Cameroons that we have negotiated with La République du Cameroon than a graveyard of people who are independent and have to heal from the consequences of war.
Well, I'm going to leave you with. I'm going to leave you debate that. I'm going to leave you debate that with Mr. Ato Mochia. I see lots of people wanting to hear his opinion. Mr. Ato Mochia, clearly your opinions, your position is at variance with Dr. Gabriela Fortune. I'll leave both of you have a conversation.
Well, I mean, some of the things, yes, but for the most part, I would agree with him. But what I say is that we don't necessarily have to beat La République on the battlefield to get independence. There are so many legal arguments. There are so many historical facts, not theories, historical facts and legal arguments that back our desire for independence. The problem is no one wants to take a hard look at them, and there are special interests like France that are blocking these issues. So what we are fighting for, because if we keep talking, we've been talking for 60 years, as I said, since 1961, nobody wants to go back and correct those mistakes. We are fighting to get to the point where the world or the international community or La République would say, you know what, this thing has become so costly. This thing has been going on for so long. Yes, they are dying in southern Cameroons, but we are also losing so much that let us go back. They don't have to dig very deep. They don't have to go as deep as they went in South Sudan. The speaker is right, because there is already so much. It is a denial. Our situation is a miscarriage of justice. And what we're asking for is justice. There are rulings in the books, in Banjul, in Abuja, that favor our argument. The problem is there is no mechanism to enforce those rulings. There are high-powered lawyers who have said that what was done, even the UK has recognized that what was done by the UN in 1961 was botched. It was a botched process. The problem is nobody has the guts. So we are really not fighting to beat La République, and that's where I would disagree with Dr.
And Dr. Gabriela can ask you a question when you finish. Please wrap up your point if he wants to.
So we are not necessarily fighting to have an army to push La République to across the Mongo. Can we do that? I would love us to be able to do that, but maybe we will get to a point where, you know, the Brits and the Americans who are beginning to move now and the French who are beginning to lose their grip in Africa would get to their senses and say, you know what, this thing is becoming, La République is imploding. I guarantee you they cannot sustain this war for 2 years. I know what I'm talking about. The country is imploding. Bia's breath is the pin holding the dynamite, stopping it from exploding. The day that breath will stop, that pin is going to come off, and they cannot sustain this thing. So it is in their interest to hurry up and find an acceptable solution. That's all I'm saying. So our war is not to push them over the Mongo. Our war is to force the international community that has admitted a botched process to go back and do, you know, a graph or fix whatever the problem was.
Your point taken. Dr. Gabriela Fortune, you have a question for Mr. Ato?
No, I want to say that Mr. Ato and I agree on certain very fundamental issues.
Where do you disagree?
Where we disagree is on the management of the posture of the international community. You know, so where we disagree is on the management of the posture of the international community. I have come to the stark realization that this, the international community, I don't want to construct a strategy that is hinged upon the sudden awakening, you know, altruism of the international community. I've come to the stark realization that the international community, they are thugs. They are driven by interest. They are not altruistic. They are not for their Christmases. They are fully aware of what they did in 1961 to us. They are fully aware about the details, the backdoor deals, the underhanded exchange of envelopes, the sale of CDC. They are fully aware of how they got us to place us in this position. Now, I am not one of those who think they are going to have a change of heart, because I think that diplomacy, international interest, interest of nations in conflicts like our own are pretty stubborn. They don't change. Now, where I think that we are having a fundamentally disagreement in approach is that the hope that we are hinging on the change of heart of the international community is predicated upon the affliction that we are meting upon our people. You know, somebody has described that as cutting our nose in order to spite our face. And this is where I find it a little bit challenging, because what is it that we are doing in the current war that is going to cause a country like France to have a change of heart? What is it that we are doing in the current war that is going to, because let's be factual, Buddy. The only thing that causes war to prick the consciences of the international community is the humanitarian cost, the body bags, the number of people that lay straight. You know, it's when Rwanda hit 1 million people that the international community told themselves, we can no longer be indifferent to what is happening there. But from 0 to 999 before the 1 million, it was interest at play. There were UN forces stationed in the spot. France was looking the other way. The people were busy killing themselves. Now, in the context of the Southern Cameroons, if we're going to go down the war path, if we would not take this war to the other side of the Mungo, if it's going to be contained in the Southern Cameroons, I can guarantee you that, as Mr. Mucho has said, when that pin that is holding the country together implodes, they would have a transition fight and a transition battle, reorganize themselves. But if there's one thing that they are all unanimous about, as in all different factions within the Republic that are currently trying to kill each other to occupy that seat, are unanimous about one thing: the Southern Cameroons cannot be independent. If we miss the window of opportunity of the transition policies happening in Cameroon, they would put their acts together and come back to the table, and they will be unanimous about the fact that they cannot give us independence. So if we can't get it from the Republic of Cameroon, if we can't take the war over the Mongo, if we don't have the means to take the war over to the Mongo, and it will be contained on our sides, then in addition to everything that we have suffered for the last 50, 60 years, we are busy punishing ourselves for what other people have done for us.
Okay, I have somebody on the line, Shay Ate Tata. Hello, Shay. Welcome on board Voices of Africa. What's your comment or question? Hello? Hello? All right. It looks like he's fallen off the line. I'm not sure. Hello, Shay Ate Tata. All right. He's not. Oh, excuse me. Hello, Shay Ate Tata, I think. You're on.
Yeah, I'm on.
Yes,
Do
please.
you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead. What's your question or comment?
I have a comment and a question. They will be very short.
Okay, sir.
I heard you ask about South Sudan. South Sudan sold its case to the international community that it was what they call a religious crusade, that the Muslims want to wipe the Christian South. Then evangelicals in the USA, they lobbied the US government, and the US government sponsored the Southern Sudanese case in the United Nations. And with what has happened after that creation of that micro country, the United States has a sour taste creating other micro countries. Number one. Number two, Cameroon was one of 13 trusteeship countries that were being managed by the Trusteeship Council. Of all these 13 countries, the last one was Pacific Papua New Guinea. They just had their own independence in 1994 because they were given the same hand they gave to the Cameroonians, and they refused. The Trusteeship Council is closed. Cameroon as a country cannot grant independence to a faction of its country. The war part, as somebody just said, is we will fight and go across the Mongo, and nobody will recognize us in the United Nations, and we will not have a country. Okay, my question. How do we see the possibility of fighting ourselves across the Mongo? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shea Tata. I will have Mr. Mochia answer the question. And before he gets to answering the question, I will amplify the question a little bit. How can you talk about independence when the United Nations handled that a long time ago? What is it synonymous with talking about describing a case of manslaughter as a case, or calling a case of manslaughter a case of first-degree murder? How do you make that case?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would answer what I can answer.
Okay.
I want to correct something Dr. Gabila said in the interest of those who are watching us.
Okay, then I'll bring in Pastor Ijacha and lawyer Are Obenson. Yes, also.
Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll make it very brief on what the caller just mentioned about South Sudan. First of all, war is unpredictable. Take the case of Eritrea and Ethiopia. Mengistu was a pain even to Ethiopians. And the northern Ethiopian rebels struck a deal with the Eritreans. There are people in La République who agree that we have a just case and are sympathetic to us, but fear for what may happen. If Biya collapses, there will be all sorts of forces from La République. The northern Ethiopians struck a deal with Eritrea, joined forces, got rid of Mengistu. He fell in 91. In 93, they shook hands as per the agreement they had of a common enemy. Don't forget that. So there is no saying that there is no faction in La République that would sympathize with us. See that their interest is paramount to them trying to keep us as slaves, and are willing to be honest and face the facts and save themselves, as opposed to dying, drowning, trying to save themselves and save us.
Hold your point. Dr. Gabila Fortune, do you have a rebuttal there before he continues?
Absolutely, Badi. And I think that in making that point, he's making a point that I am making. I'm thinking that we should be thinking, instead of treating them as adversary and waging an all-out war against La République Cameroon as if they are a homogeneous entity, we should, like he is saying, actually be looking for allies within that context to be able to take up the question of Southern Cameroonians' situation in order to look for a solution. Now, will that solution be independence? Will they be preferably disposed to make that solution independence? I don't know. But I think that we should have that conversation that says, let's find diverging tendencies within that context to be sympathetic to our cause and to put everything on the table. On the same token, we should be very prepared that if we would approach it in such a strategic manner, if we are going to put independence on the table and they say that they will not settle for independence, but they would settle for, say, a two-state confederation, we should, as a people also, because every negotiation is a give and take, we should, as a people, also be prepared to say that under certain conditions which we would carefully define, we are willing to work with you together against the common enemy in order to secure these gains. That is a win-win for both yourselves and ourselves. I think that degree of flexibility, it's what we are really asking from all parties within the conflict. Because for the sake of the argument, let's say that, contrary to what Comrade Mucha has said, if we do not find such sympathetic ear within the polity of La République du Cameroon, then I think that for the legitimacy of the Southern Cameroonian question, we would be left with no option than to fight and get it done by war. Because in reality, notwithstanding the divergences of our perspective as to how we want as an outcome, I don't think any of us is of the view that the status quo should be maintained. We are all unhappy, upset, or in disagreement with the treatment method of Southern Cameroonians. Where we differ is what strategic approach to adopt to find a solution. So if we can have inroads in La République Cameroon and build coalitions, and this is where someone like Dr. Shetata is going to come in, because the SDF, for the sake of the argument, and which also Pastor Jacha's party is sitting in that space
Pastor
where
Jacha will be coming on the platform with Lawyer Benson in a moment.
They have their feet in, for the sake of the argument, in both territories. If they can leverage their connections within the existing politics of the Republic of Cameroon to make our case in such a way that it buys us the kind of autonomy that gives us management of our affairs, it may be a win-win path that prevents us from going down the pathway of war. Because like Mr. Mucho has said, yes, war is so uncertain. It's neither here nor there. We could fight for 50, 60 years and not end up with the kind of autonomy in governance that we are looking for. And let us not forget to look inwards, because as some separate thing that we probably need to touch on, we have seen some of our own leaders begin to demonstrate certain tendencies that is indicative of the kind of Southern Cameroons that we may have to deal with. So there are not simple answers here. But I can promise you that if we are going to do all this fight to end up with someone like, excuse me to use him as an example, Sako Ikome as the president of Southern Cameroons, running Southern Cameroons the way he's run his term as the interim government, it would have been 60 years or X years of totally wasted effort fighting. We need to be very careful. There are no simple answers in this thing.
Okay, your point?
We ought to ultimately position ourselves in such a way that we get the best deal out of this phase for our people.
Okay.
And I feel that all options be on the table.
Thank you, Dr. Gabila Fortune. Mr. Muchia, I can tell you that Dr. Gabila Fortune has put you in a very hot seat. I can see you getting up to respond. Now, before you respond and briefly so we can bring the other participants on the platform, why do you take even Eritrea, even South Sudan, sort of as a blueprint? We know it's not a democracy there. It's not a Jeffersonian democracy there. You see South Sudanese are fighting, killing each other. The two leaders cannot even get to cooperate, agree on anything, not even when they go to Rome and the Pope goes down on his knees and kisses their feet. They come back, they're fighting. Why do you think that an independent Southern Cameroon wouldn't end up with the same thing like Eritrea and South Sudan, given what we're seeing now?
Well, there is no saying that Southern Cameroons cannot end up like South Sudan. It's a human character thing. The problem in South Sudan is what we have in Iraq today. The proper institutions were not put in place. And if you don't have the right structures, and if the structures don't have the right support, it's going to be chaos. But we always talk about South Sudan as if South Sudan is is hell, is South Cameroon. The problem in South Sudan was poor governance, and poor governance from people who were not very experienced in managing the affairs of a country. But we in Southern Cameroons, we have people who, by faith, are really more experienced than most of the leaders in South Sudan in terms of governance. We had a government. Remember, we had a free and fair election in 1959, when Honorable Foncha beat Dr. Endele. We had institutions, we had governance. We were running ourselves like an independent country. We had a police force. We had all these things. South Sudan never had those things. South Sudan never had governance. They never had government. They never had a blueprint. And South Sudan is going through a period. They will get over it. Somalia, I remind you, Somalia was worse than South Sudan. There was a time Somalia was being run by warlords. Nobody knew that Somalia would ever come back as a country. The US pulled out of Somalia. That's how chaotic it was.
Let me ask you, let me cross-examine you right there, sir. Let me cross-examine you right there. From what you say, I mean, you're overly optimistic about what could be the outcome of the Southern Cameroonian struggle. Do you believe in the theory of the end justifies the means, or the means should explain what you're likely to get in the end?
Neither. You want something and you go for it.
And the reason why
Whatever-
I ask you this question, sir, is because I just got a text here. Some people are quoting extensively the point, the situation among even Ambazonian leaders. Sako doesn't see eye to eye. Now, with Chris Anu, he doesn't see eye to eye with Ayabacho. And you have all these factions fighting each other. Had Paul Biya said, okay, you want independence 4 years ago, goodbye. What do you think would be happening in Southern Cameroons today?
Let me tell you, I have consistently said what these guys are doing in the diaspora is a clown show. I wasn't going to call their names, but since you've called them by name, that is a clown show. I have consistently said the leaders of this revolution or this liberation struggle are on ground zero and will emerge from ground zero. I have challenged all this dog and pony show in the diaspora for anybody to tell me from the beginning of mankind which leaders sat 5,000 miles away from a territory they wanted to liberate and liberated that territory. Tell me one.
Paul Kagame didn't do that either.
So when people sit 5,000 miles in the warmth of some Western country and blow noise on social media and think that they will be the leaders, I am telling Southern Cameroonians, the leader of a liberated Southern Cameroons is not coming from the diaspora. So I don't pay much mind to this Sako Chris Anu Ayaba clown show. It's a complete embarrassment and disgrace. The diaspora plays the role of a support cast. We have to support the fighters on the ground. It doesn't matter if they are in jail. It doesn't matter if they are in the bushes. It doesn't matter if they are free. There is a reason, I tell Southern Cameroonians, while Navalny left Germany close to death to return to Russia, he knew he was going to jail. There is a reason Aung San Suu Kyi refused to leave Myanmar and spent 15 of 21 years under house arrest. She had to be in Myanmar. There is a reason Mandela refused exile in exchange for freedom. He had to be in South Africa. So the diaspora is doing a disservice by making Southern Cameroonians think that the leader is in the diaspora. The leader is not. We have clown shows in the diaspora. The leader is on ground zero, cannot emerge because they are in a very, very precarious situation. That regime is very tyrannical. They will kill in an instant. And I will not ask anybody to stick their head out now. But the time will come when we would know who that leader on ground zero is. I guarantee you that. They are on ground zero.
Thank you, sir. Let me bring in Mr. or Lawyer Obenson. And of course, Pastor Kennedy Ejacha, please be prepared to come on the platform momentarily. You are a lawyer, and sometimes, or oftentimes in civilized societies, disputes are handled in courts of law. Do you think that Southern Cameroonians have a legal case, a strong case, to take before the international court system to get whether independence or to get even a federation? If not, why not?
Let me start by saying, first of all, I really want to take this argument to another level, and I'll come to your question in the sense that it's really important that this, after 6 years of this war, that we really move forward. And one of what I think we have not done as Cameroonians is consider an alternative that's not on the table. What that alternative is really where the opportunity lies, right? Because we're stuck with what we have, what we know, and what we're comfortable with. The opportunity lies in what we are uncomfortable with. Now, the legal arguments have been made. They were made in Banjul already about the situation of the Anglophone situation. We also know that self-determination is a concept of law.
Let me make sure I get you clearly, Mr. Obenson, Lawyer Obenson.
Yes.
You talk about the Banjul discussions or arguments. Were they arguments or there were conclusions? Because it's one thing to take a case to court, it's a completely different thing to win or lose that case. What were the Banjul conclusions, sir?
Well, there were the conclusions that Southern Cameroonians have a right to self-determination. Those were the conclusions. And that's a legal principle that can be applied. But to argue a case in court, you need two parties, and each party has to establish that they have legal grounds to make their case. That is the case that people of Southern Cameroon will have to establish for an international court to be able to resolve the conflict, so to speak. But you are assuming, we have to assume, if we want to go down the route, that there are two parties. And if there are parties, then there are several ways in which this can be done. That even going through the court, and even when you have a conclusive argument made by a court, there has to be an acceptance of that outcome, which typically comes back to a negotiation, and which I think that is the most significant way that we can resolve the conflict. So that's my how I would respond to that. But I also want to respond to the question that Mr. Ndifo raised, and to address it. As far back as March 2018, there were 5 points that I thought that would be the best way for us to move out of to move forward. The first thing is that I doubt that there's anybody, whether they're Anglophone or Francophone, whether they're clamoring for independence or federation. I doubt that there's anybody who is in any doubt that there is an Anglophone problem, so to speak, that is not in dispute. Because if the status quo was attainable, if the status quo was satisfactory, we will not be in this conflict. So that's one. What exactly is that problem has been something that we have never really given the Anglophone the opportunity to establish, which I think should be the first starting point. That in the context, if the government of Cameroon, and that's a far, 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 far cry from where we are, but if we were going to have a dialogue, to dialogue our way out of this problem, there has to be an Anglophone dialogue. It has to be that Anglophones come to the table with an idea of what they want, the ideal that they want out of this. And that has to be in the context and with the understanding that if you're going into a dialogue, you're dialoguing with a counterparty. And that counterparty is also going to have, you would have to make concessions and they will have to make concessions. So one step is that Anglophone dialogue in itself. The second step would be that dialogue between the Anglophones and the state of Cameroon in itself. And then there has to be a process whereby the outcome of that dialogue is accepted by the minority, which is in this case is the Anglophones, in the context that there are things that Anglophones may have to accept in that process. I keep emphasizing that because we cannot go into a dialogue with the only outcome that we have being what we want. We have to go into the dialogue understanding that we are going to craft a solution that works for us, and us here is the parties. And invariably that has to lead us to how we come out of this, what form of state is going to guarantee the ideals that we're going to uphold as what should govern our relationship, whether we're independent Anglophones or whether we're living together as Francophones. This process, this concept that I'm telling you, has to be something that we mature into after 6 years of war, that we cannot just continue putting our stakes on the ground that this is the position that we have. We have to evolve as human beings. I would like to conclude my submission here by saying that we have to acknowledge our historical past. We have to acknowledge those shortcomings, and we do acknowledge them. But what we seek to build is a future of a Cameroon that must not necessarily mirror what the past is, but that reflects the aspirations of what the future should be. And that is what should fuel our conversations at this time.
Lawyer Obenson, you are a man of law. if Southern Cameroonians came to you to hire your services to defend them in an international court system, will you take that case?
I will take the case on the grounds that what we defend is the dignity of every human being that is born in Anglophone Cameroon. Obviously, there is need for us to advocate for that dignity of the Anglophone Cameroonian, and in that process, proceed with a negotiation of how we can guarantee that dignity, whatever that outcome is.
Okay, now let me have some questions for Pastor Kennedy Ejacha. Pastor Kennedy Ejacha, you are outright dismissive of what you call the Grand National Dialogue. Your preference is federalism. Why do you think that federalism is the panacea or the panacea for the issues that we have today, when it did not work previously?
Yes, okay. Just before I get to your question, I just want to piggyback on some of the things that Barrister Obenson said. Very salient, very important. He talked about the need for intra-Anglophone dialogue, for Anglophones to have an intra-dialogue. And that has always been a hot topic. We had AAC 1, AAC 2, and at the conclusion of AAC 2, a decision, or it was acknowledged that Anglophones should meet frequently and have this dialogue. Now, with the advent of this current crisis that morphed into a war, that's something that we all are very observant of. It is the fact that the government of Cameroon is vehemently opposed to any intra-Anglophone dialogue. We saw what they did to Cardinal Tumi's initiative when he wanted to convene the Anglophones conference. The government of Cameroon, through its spokesman back then, Minister Chiroma, said it's over their dead body that the Anglophones were going to meet. So now you see a government that is bent on not listening to the Anglophones. They've done everything that goes contrary to the desire to have somebody, to have what I'll call a valid or reliable interlocutor. So the government of Cameroon would rather prefer to create chaos and dismay amongst us, and then use that as justification for not dialoguing with us, because we want and we've done everything possible. There was even an initiative that was ongoing just about 4 months ago, and we thought we were going to meet in Cameroon, the Anglophones. So I've been part of some of those initiatives.
So the question again I ask you, Reverend Ejacha, is why do you think that federalism resolves the problem? All of this started on the rails of federalism in 1960 or 61, like that. So why do you think that it's a workable solution today?
By the way, federalism was never ever given a chance to deploy itself in Cameroon. Never. So we came in federation in 1961. And remember, the first moves of the Ahijo regime was to take Cameroon towards a uniparty system. So even before the abrogation of the federation in 1972, there had already been elements within the Cameroon system of governance that is antithetical to the proponents of federalism, which is self-determination. That one-party system that was installed in 1966. So it's clear that federalism was never tried in Cameroon. Now, those who say that federalism is not a solution, it's because they don't understand what federalism is advocating for. At the core of federalism, there is self-determination, with the outcome of which is the respect of human dignity. It means people are capable to self-determine, to choose their way of life.
Reverend Jacha, you are talking about federalism, not the government in Yaoundé.
Yes, because the government in Yaoundé is not interested in federalism. Mr. Biya, that was in Paris, said that they had tried to assimilate the Anglophones unsuccessfully. So, just from that, it is clear that federalism has never been in the agenda. We know for a sure fact that the Jacobinist system in Yaoundé is against not federalism, but they are against the dignity of human being. The problem is not the federalism. The problem is the government, the system in Cameroon does not think that human beings have rights to self-determine. Like Mr. Paul Biya, he believes that nobody should have the right to tell him that you cannot be president of Cameroon.
Okay, so your head is between, when I say your head, your federalist position is between Mr. Biya and his government, who don't want to hear about federalism, and Ambazonia fighters who say that's even a non-starter. Some people say you're just making noise.
No, we're not making noise in that. And I'm clear on this. I am a federalist, and if you have to put the Biya regime and the Ambazonia, if those were the only options that I have in my life, I would choose the Ambazonia. Because we have tried and tested the system for more than 60 years. We know what the system stands for. Now, it is better for us to take an adventure of what we don't know that acknowledges what we're fighting for. Because now, this warlord, these crazy Ambazonian guys, they're saying that they're fighting for self-determination. Mr. Paul Biya is clear on the fact that he is fighting against self-determination. And he is committing atrocities in his fight against self-determination. Likewise, we have Ambazonians who are saying that they are fighting for self-determination and creating atrocity. So, from the standpoint of atrocities, both of them are creating atrocities. But if there is a point of intersection that I'm looking for, I have a point of intersection with the Ambazonians that I don't have with the regime in Yaoundé.
Okay, your point has been taken. Let me bring up Mr.
I have something before I leave.
Okay.
Because I'll pick back on what Dr. Fortune and Mr. Mutia were talking about with regards to war. They kept focusing on Mr. Biya's breath as the only element that is holding the pin over the dynamite. You have to come out of that mindset. And this is where I'm telling you where the regime is. When we talk about the regime, I'm talking about the system that is being lauded by France in Cameroon. This system is more worried about our neighbor Nigeria. Nigeria is the soft spot of this crisis. And let me tell you, every day, when the security system in Cameroon, when they wake up, when they are reading the tea leaves, they want to know in which direction Nigeria is going. Because that's where the game changer would ever come from. If there is a change of system, and there's already debate in the Nigerian Senate and Parliament where you are having some pro-Cameroon, Southern Cameroon independent elements within the Nigerian system. So that system may change. And if that system changes, and we have the Ambazonians have a favorable relationship with Nigeria, that's the complete game changer. And this is why I'm telling you. See, when we had this event, I forgot the town in which it was, but where I think it was about 14 or 6, between 14 or 6 B member. Please don't quote me on the numbers, but it was news when these B guys were killed. What happened right thereafter? We saw the Etat Major of Cameroon going to have meetings in Nigeria, because the only equation could be If these guys are getting stronger, then there is something happening with the Nigerian border.
Okay, thank you, Reverend Pastor Kennedy Ajacha. I will have Mr. Ato Muchia answer one or two questions, and then all the other panelists will come in with their closing words. Mr. Ato Muchia, all was as said in my introduction, and in some form of dialogue. In a dialogue, it's a matter of give and take. It's not my way or no way. If Ambazonian leaders were called up to dialogue with the Yaoundé authorities or the government, Mr. Paul Biya, what positions are the Ambazonians or Southern Cameroonians willing to give up?
You don't go into a negotiation thinking about what you're willing to give up. You go into a negotiation thinking that you are going to get everything you deserve and everything you ask for. Before I come back to your question, Divine, I want to invite Pastor Kennedy. His definition of federalism is good. And that's what we want in our independent Southern Cameroons. Because for us to expect what he is saying, which is very correct, I agree with him. For us to get it through Yaoundé means we have to change, deprogram the mindset of La République, deprogram the mindset of France, correct them, and then expect that correction to spill from Yaoundé to us, which will take over 1,000 years. So let's just focus, get our own state, and then implement exactly what he is saying, where the people can rule themselves and do their self-determination. But there is no reason. Mandela put it best in his interview with Oprah Winfrey, that if you want to get respect in prison, you must put your foot down from day one and demand it. We are not going into negotiations with Paul Biya with our leg up. We have to put our foot down, and there is no such thing as negotiations. You must give, you must take. If it's your right, if it's your entitlement, if that's what the majority of the people want, then you have to make it as clear as daylight that this is what we want, and we would not settle for anything less. This idea of us settling, nobody, when I say nobody, not us Southern Cameroonians, nobody since 1884, when some Europeans sat in Berlin and split up Africa, nobody has asked us as a people, what do you as a people want? They didn't give us that option in 1961. It's about time that we put our foot down as a people and say, we have a right to demand for what we want. Americans do not ask the British. America did not go to war of independence against Britain based on what Britain wanted. They went to war against Britain based on what Americans wanted for America. So
it's quite apt, I have to say, it's quite apt when you cite the American War of Independence. I would say that in the American War of Independence, where clearly there's somebody like General Washington who led the fight. The question I just got by text now for you, Mr. Ato Muchia, is who leads the Southern Cameroons now? Who in the struggle? Is it Mr. Sako? Is it Ayabacho? Is it Sisseku? It is who the leader is. If you were called today to negotiate, who would the Yaoundé administration be talking to, given the infighting?
Look, listen, I have said it and I repeat it. There is no leader of this struggle in the diaspora. None of these Ayaba Sako people are leaders. They are groups. They are leaders of their groups. They are not leaders of this liberation struggle. The international community recognizes one person, and that is Julius Ayuk Tabe Sisiku. He may be in prison. Mandela was in prison for 27 years. Aung San Suu Kyi was under house arrest for 15 of 21 years. She remained the leader of the Myanmar struggle. Just because Sisiku is in prison does not mean that he is not the leader of this struggle. This clown show in the diaspora is a distraction. We need to rally around the person who was recognized by the people of Southern Cameroon as the leader. There is no substantive reason why that leadership has been taken away or does not still rest with Sisiku. Give me one reason why, because he is in prison, he is no longer the leader. And I would give you a list of people who have been to jail and who became presidents in their countries.
My final question to you, sir, before I bring up the other people for their concluding statements and then have your own concluding statements as last, is in this whole struggle, and because I'm asking you this question because you talk extensively about the American experience. Today, up till today, we hear the Americans say the founding fathers thought that, the founding fathers said that. Does it occur even to Southern Cameroonians to say, but what did the founding fathers want? And could we build on that? Could we perfect that? Is there ever in your back burner what the founding fathers of Southern Cameroon thought?
Yes, yes. That has been invoked several times. We've had it in meetings. We've had it at the town hall where reference has been made to the meeting the leaders of Southern Cameroon met in Mamfe, right? And said we were not given the option of independence. It was presented at the United Nations. Fongoji Dinka has said it. Those who have read those annals have said it. They asked for it and it was denied them. So what did the founding fathers want? They wanted the option of independence. It was denied them. And that's why even the UK authorities are now said that it was a botched attempt. Right? So we know what the founding fathers want. When they left Enugu, they didn't leave the Eastern House of Nigeria to go and join La Republique. That option was not on the table. They left Enugu to come back to Boya to build their country. Then the 1961 thing came after they left Enugu, but there was no 1961 on the table when they left Enugu. They were coming to get their own country. And they asked for that.
Yeah. Your point taken, sir. That's Mr. Ato Muchia. You are watching Voices of Africa at Chat Night. My name is Divine Chamugong. I'm anchoring this broadcast on the platform Chat Night Africa. We're airing this show live on our website, www.chatnightafrica.net. It's also on our YouTube channel, Chat Night Africa. It's airing on our page, broadcast page on Facebook, followed by thousands and thousands of people across Africa. It's called Chat Night Africa. Please, when you go to our YouTube channel, let's build it together brick by brick. Simply click on the subscribe button. Since every good thing must come to an end, I'm not ending the show yet until I hear the last word from each participant. Let me bring Dr. Gabila Fortune first. You each have 1.5 minutes, sir. Dr. Gabila Fortune.
Dr. Fortune. Thanks so much, Buddy, for hosting. This has been very interesting and very informative show. I'm happy to realize that there's a lot that we agree on, that we disagree. I'm happy to realize that we all agree on the imperative of self-determination for the Southern Cameroonians. I'm very pleased with the presentation that Dr. Are gave. It speaks of the possibility of the future that we are all aspiring for. I'm very pleased about the well-grounded nature of the arguments that Mr. Mucha, I like to call him Comrade Mucha, gave, because it explains the extent to which the hardcore fundamental issues of the argument lay. And somewhere in between those two variations is Pastor Ejacha and myself, who are saying that we are looking at this regime. We have seen what they're capable of. We are trying to put to them on the table the possibility of finding a peaceful way out of this. Just quickly, in terms of a pathway to peace, I think that's very important that we emphasize the importance of releasing political prisoners. I think it's important that we call for the imperative of creating a conducive condition for a meaningful, inclusive dialogue or series of dialogues. And that inclusive conditions would entail calling for a ceasefire, setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of sorts, bring about healing to our community, granting general amnesty in the context of reconstruction, and organizing a series of dialogues, like Mr. Ari said earlier on, a series of dialogue that speaks about an all Anglophone conversation that needs to happen, a dialogue that needs to happen between the Anglophone community, the Southern Cameroon community, and the government of Cameroon, and within the perspective of the expectation that sanity would prevail, a national, all-inclusive dialogue that seeks to chart the future of what we think could be a better Cameroon. Within assuming Badi in this context that post the current regime, a new president is going to come in space who is going to be reasonable, who will be looking at the perspective of national reconciliation, reconstruction, and wanting to unite the country together, taking into consideration the Anglophone quest for self-determination as a key factor in keeping Cameroon together. If that fragment of the engagement does not triumph, then unfortunately we would have to give reason to the Amazonian quest for independence by war. We are hoping that because war is costly and expensive, we would all avoid that route and hope that sanity is going to prevail, where we would find means of enhancing this self-determination within a broader series of dialogues that build rather than destroy.
Thank you, Dr. Gabila Fortum, live from South Africa. And now we have Pastor Kennedy Ejacha for his concluding statement. Pastor Kennedy Ejacha.
Yes, Nidi, once more, I mean, I'm just going to thank you for offering this platform, for making this possible. And I'm honored to have shared this moment with very, positive-minded human beings. Some identify themselves as Cameroonians. And, I think we've spoken today and we've touched on all the different shades of opinion that constitute our people in Southern Cameroon. It's always an honor for me to share a podium with somebody like Dr. Gabila Fortum, a very intelligent and pragmatic person. He has a very pragmatic approach, and I think that's why we agree on so many things. What I want to tell my brothers and my sisters from Southern Cameroons, it's that irrespective of where we stand in this crisis, there is 90% of the issues that we all agree on. 90%. I'm very clear on that. The other 10% is unfortunate that that's what is separating us. For instance, I believe fully in self-determination, but I don't believe that we should make self-determination more valuable than human life. The true leadership is leadership that puts the human being ahead of every other consideration. So war to me is not something that guarantees human dignity. There are other ways of fighting to achieve our goals. For instance, I'm from the Social Democratic Front. We fought a hard fight against the regime. 6 people were killed in 1990, but we brought multipartyism in Cameroon. There's always a risk in whatever path we take. Those of us who are saying we chose a non-violent way, it's not because it's safe. No, you will see most of those that have even given their life are those that were non-violent. It's not those who carry the gun. We know that. We are conscious of that every day, that we are at arm's way. But life is better than any other thing. So let's stand, continue to fight as hard as we can fight for our self-determination, for our rights to determine our future. But let's put human life ahead of everything. Thank you.
Pastor Kennedy Ejacha, on his concluding remarks. And now we will bring lawyer Are Obenson and end with Mr. Ato Muchia. Lawyer Are Obenson.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be on chat night. I think today we have demonstrated what is possible, because as I can always quote this, too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. Because the answers we have demonstrated today, that we agree on what the outcome is. Human dignity for every person that we know. That's where we start. And that the next steps that we're going to take has to involve some form of us accepting and listening to everybody's opinion, and then determine how we are going to arrive at a conclusion. I have honestly enjoyed this conversation and really admired the arguments that have been laid forward by everybody. And also, I hope that we spend a lot more of our time focusing on this, what we have in common. What is it that is possible that can move us to where we want to be? That in essence is sometimes missing in the conversation, where we argue too much about what is wrong, that we fail to see what can be right. And what can be right is the opportunity for us to, one, respect our difference in opinion, two, be able to ensure that the outcome of this is not structured in what I believe, but structured in the aspirations of the Cameroonian people.
Thank you, lawyer Are L. Obenson. And now we will bring our friend, Mr. Ato Muchia, on the platform for his concluding remarks. Mr. Ato Muchia.
Yeah, I want to thank you for having me as part of this debate, and my respects and salutations to my fellow panelists. It's been a very healthy debate. I want to end by telling the people of Southern Cameroons, when we come to what concerns us as a people, we must never dilute our identity. We must know who we are. We must know our history, and we must know where we are going. The last thing we want to do is dilute our identity as a people. Then we lose ourselves if we do that. If we know our identity, we must have the open mind of respecting the wishes of the majority of people. It's what our founding fathers wanted. Endele shook hands with Dr. Endele shook hands with Honorable Foncha, though they had divergent views, and the will of the majority prevailed. So let us get out of this mindset of what we want as individuals, what we think or we prescribe, and learn to be democratic and have an open mind. And what the people want, it is their lives, it is their aspirations. Let us fight to give it to them. War is not ideal, but war was forced on us, and we must respond. Dictators do not change. Tyrants do not change. We have to change our future, our destiny. If we are not willing to die for it, then America would not be America. Algeria will not be Algeria. None of the great nations would be what they are today. At my point in time, yes, I am willing to give my life so that my children could have a better life and better opportunity than I did. If that means that war will be the altar where I would have to do that sacrifice, then yes, for my children and grandchildren's sake, yes, I am willing to die.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ato Muchia. Ladies and gentlemen, as you must have realized, when I decided to do this show, I strove to make sure that all the shades or the currents involving this armed uprising in Anglophone Cameroon, if you want to call it Southern Cameroon, it's fine, all the currents were represented on the platform. Because on Voices of Africa at Chat Night Africa, we believe in the independence of journalism. Thank you. I want to thank all of those who are watching and sharing this broadcast. It's on our YouTube channel, it's on our website, it's on Facebook, our Facebook broadcast page. I want to also thank all the people who've been donating resources to make sure this platform looks the way it is. 3 years ago, we started on a low-tech cell phone. Here we are today because of the people who believe in the mission and vision of the platform called Chat Night Africa. I want to thank all of you. But before my guests all go, I have a little present. It's not fufu and njama huckleberry from Bali and smoked fish. It's a bit of beautiful music, and I'm sure you watching, you, my guest, will love it. Here we go. Just before I conclude the broadcast. And on the keyboard is Mr. Lazar Schatzeka in Maryland. On the guitar is Mr. Bliss. If you want some quality discussion, some quality content, come to Voices of Africa at Chat Night. Merci à tout le monde. My name is Divine Shamakong. Thank you for watching. I love you. I do not take your friendship for granted.
I'm coming back. I'm coming to get down. I'm coming to dance, We're gonna dance, we're gonna get down, we're gonna party hard, we're gonna boogie woogie, and when we jam, it's out of sight. This song right here, it's dynamite. I'm ready, I'm coming back, I'm coming.